I'm gonna.
I don't know. My tea is either too hot, so I take
You're
the lid
now
off.
streaming, Jerry. You're streaming, just in case you want to know.
Well, not yet. It's just starting up now. Okay, now
Okay,
you are.
you can still talk.
Yeah.
I mean, you know me, I talk all the time, so.
Well, my cup either keeps it cold or hot.
Too hot.
Too hot.
That
Anyway.
same problem. It was a windy, windy day.
Did you see my joke for you?
No, so it's going to be a surprise.
Well, I didn't put the answer on it. So.
Oh, so it's going to be a surprise anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Haha.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time I don't read your part ahead of time, so I'm usually surprised.
Same here. I'm too worried about getting my part done. Or I'm thankful when I get my part done.
There you go.
Get that out of me.
You need to go get some water before we officially start?
Well, I'm not sure.
Because I cannot read your stories nearly as well.
Well, that's not necessarily true.
Got 1 minute.
Should I not dance since we're on YouTube?
No, that's all the more reason you should.
KHOI 89.1, Story City, Ames. It's a reading radio.
Welcome to Reading Radio.
We connect you to the world of ideas over the KHOI airwaves.
This is KHOI, Story City, Ames, with your hosts.
I'm Jerry Hyde, Youth Services Manager at your Ames Public Library.
And I'm Kathy Cooney, Adult Services Librarian, also at your Ames Public Library. And thanks as always to the wonderful Ben Schrag, who works in youth services and wrote and performed our extra catchy theme music that you'll have an opportunity to hear a couple of other times during the course of our program. So if you're just joining us for the first time, or if you'd like a refresher on how our program normally works, we will start off by reading some stories for our younger listeners. And then we'll have a conversation for everyone about our weekly topic, which is packed with all kinds of great recommendations for books to read. And so this week, we've taken our theme from last Monday, which was the winter solstice, which is when the North Pole is tilted the furthest away from the sun, which is why it's so cold in the Northern Hemisphere right now. And that also means it's the day that has the least daylight and the most darkness during the year. And so even though we don't at the moment have very much snow out there, this windy kind of cold weather is perfect for curling up with a fuzzy blanket, a mug of your favorite hot drink, a good book, and maybe an animal or two. Domesticated ones only, of course. And many people like to read books that reflect the season. So Jerry and I have chosen books that are set during the winter or in the snow.
So, Kathy, I have a joke for
Jerry,
you.
do you?
Yes. What do you call an old snowman?
I don't know.
Water. So As you said, we may not have any fresh snow outside, but my first couple of books are about snow, what you can do with it and what happens to the creations you make. Thus the snowman joke. One of the first things I think about the snow after the beauty of it is snowballs and snowmen. And so the former just gets me in trouble, snowballs. But the latter is quite a bit of fun, especially when you have someone to create it with. But listeners, have you ever thought about what snowmen do after they are created? Before they turn to water.
I
So
don't
my
know that
first,
I've ever thought about it.
yeah, it's very interesting that what this author and illustrator, they're a husband and wife team, of what they have done with snowmen and what they do when we're all sleeping. So both of them are read with permission from Dial Books, a division of Penguin Publishing Group. One's 2002 copyright and the other is 2012. And the first one is called, and the author is Carolyn Booner and the illustrator is Mark Booner, her husband. So my story title is Snowmen at Night. And of course, there's wonderful illustrations of rolling up the ball, the tiny little ball into a big, huge ball, and then the medium-sized ball. And then the story begins with a young person putting a carrot in the head of the snowman, and it has a hat and a striped scarf and little raisins for his eyes, or maybe they're rocks. You can use your imagination with that, for his mouth and for his eyes. And the words say, "One wintry day I made a snowman, very round and tall. The next day when I saw him, he was not the same at all. His hat had slipped, his arms drooped down. He really looked a fright. It made me start to wonder, what do snowmen do at night? I think that snowmen start to slide when it gets really dark, off the lawn and down the street, right into the park. They gather in a circle while they wait for all the others, sipping cups of ice cold cocoa made by snowman mothers. Then the snowmen games begin. They line up in their places, each one anxious for his turn in the snowman races. After everyone has had a chance at racing once or twice, they go on over to the pond to do skating tricks on ice. Sometimes they start giggling and they act like clowns. They bump into each other till they all fall down. They gather up their snowman or snowballs. The pitcher takes his aim, and underneath the moonlit sky, they play a baseball game. No one knows just how it started, but soon it's quite a sight, with snowmen throwing snowballs in the world's best snowball fight. Then it's time for sledding, and it's a wild ride down the hill. Woo! They all yell. This is, by far, the snowman's biggest thrill. Finally, they're tuckered out and getting sleepy, so they slowly gather up their things, and one by one they go. So if your snowman's grin is a little crooked, or he's lost a little height, you'll know he's just been doing what snowmen do at night. So those snowmen are doing lots and lots of different things at night. But what if they were doing other things, other occupations during that time instead of just being silly snowmen?
Instead of being snowmen, they were business snowmen.
Snowmen at work. And I think the political correct word would not necessarily be snowmen. It should
Snow
be
people.
a snow person or people. But this was back in the early 2000s, and we weren't as conscious of that as we are now.
It is also substantially harder to rhyme with the word people.
Yeah, fruitful, people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's begin our story with snow people, snowmen at work. One night I made a snowman, then went inside to sleep. And when I woke, I saw more snow had fallen, soft and deep. I went inside to shovel, but I saw the walks were clear. No one else was outside, but my snowman standing near. Was he the one who shoveled with a snowman shoveling crew? Could it be I just don't see that snowmen have jobs too? The dentist might drill bits of coal to fix a snowman's smile. A little brush and polish sends the snowman home in style. A sled with crooked runners that need to be made straight goes to the snow mechanics who will fix it while you wait. The grocer stocks his shelves with foods that snowmen love to eat: frozen peas and frosty flakes and ice cream for a treat. Snow children beg their mothers to go in the snow pet store. The pet store owner has snow pups, a coldfish tank, and more. The baker spreads sweet icing onto every frozen bun. There's frosted cake and ice cold rolls, enough for everyone. The teachers teach snow children to count snowflakes one by one and how to spell Antarctica, refrigerate, and fun. There might be snow magicians who do tricks for their career. They pull snow rabbits out of hats or make them disappear. If, if your snowcat is stuck and there's no way to get it down, just call the firefighters. They're the bravest folks in town. The Storytime librarian reads tales from days of yore, how brave snow knights defend the right while mighty dragons roar. A birthday celebration means a party is in store, and the pizza man delivers frozen pizza to your door. The factory workers carefully assemble jolly toys, knowing that they're bringing smiles to snow girls and snow boys. The big rig's lights glow brightly while the tires spin round and round. The snow truck driver hauls a load of frozen goods to town. My snowman really might have shoveled, and I never knew that all around us snowmen have a lot of work to do. And listeners, and Kathy, you can't see this, but the last page is a snowman as the President of the United States. So we never know who might be doing the work that we're doing while we are sleeping. So snowmen can
It's
do
true.
many, many things.
Snow people.
Snow people, this is true. We can
My
do
favorite. I liked the snow pups.
Yes, when I read that and chose the book, I thought of your little puppy, Pippa, and how she might enjoy that story and be a little. And if you see the illustrations, it's like, you know, a snow puppy, and they're like barking and their tongues
Oh,
are
yeah.
out. And you know, a typical puppy when you go into a pet store. So those two books kind of go with the snow. But our next book is a book that I thought was very appropriate for what the season is. So no matter what your beliefs or what your thoughts of the season, that there still is like a spirit of giving in the air during this time. So my share with each of our listeners and you, Kathy and Mike, for this time is a thought of generosity, which is not only important during this season, but all year round. So this is the fable of the quilt maker's gift. It has a copyright of 2000 and is read with permission from Scholastic Press. It is a little longer than most of my stories that I read. And so if you want to grab that cup of cocoa or tea or coffee and then sit back and enjoy, let's listen to The Quilt Maker's Gift, author Jeff Brimbull and illustrator Gail DeMarkin. And by the way, as the illustrations are just marvelous. And if you're a quilter, you definitely want to check out this book just for the beautiful quilt patterns that are in it. And it's just a really beautiful book and a beautiful message for each of us. So The Quilt Maker's Gift. There was once a quilt maker who kept a house in the blue misty mountains up high. Even the oldest great-great-grandfather could not recall a time when she was not up there sewing away day after day. Here and there and wherever the sun warmed the earth, it was said she made the prettiest quilts anyone had ever seen. The blues seemed to come from the deepest part of the ocean, the whites from the northernmost snows, the greens and the purples from the abundant wildflowers, the reds, oranges, and pinks from the most wonderful sunsets. Some said there was a magic in her fingers. Some whispered that her needles and cloth were gifts of the bewitched. And still others said the quilts really fell to earth from the shoulders of passing angels. Many people climbed her mountain, pockets bursting with gold, hoping to buy one of those wonderful quilts. But the woman would not sell them. I give my quilts to those who are poor or homeless, she told all who knocked on the door. They are not for the rich. On the darkest and coldest nights, the woman would make her way down the mountain to the town below. There she would wander the cobblestone streets until she came upon someone sleeping outside in the chill. She would then take a newly finished quilt from her bag, wrap it around the shivering shoulders, tuck them in tight, and tiptoe away. Then, the very next morning, with a steaming cup of blackberry tea, she would begin a new quilt. Now, at this time, there also lived a very powerful and greedy king who liked nothing better than to receive presents. The hundreds of thousands of beautiful gifts he got for Christmas and his birthday were never enough. So a law was passed that the king would celebrate his birthday twice a year. When that still wasn't enough, he ordered his soldiers to search the kingdom for those few people who had not yet given him a gift. Over the years, the king had come to own almost all of the prettiest things in the world. Throughout the castle, from top to bottom, in drawers and on shelves, in boxes and trunks and closets and sacks, all of the king's countless things were stashed. Things that shimmered and glittered and glowed, things whimsical and practical, things mysterious and magical. So many, many things that the king kept a list of all the lists of things he owned. And yet, with all these marvelous treasures to enjoy, the king never smiled. He was not happy at all. Somewhere there must be a beautiful thing that will finally make me happy, he was often heard to say, and I will have it. One day, a soldier rushed into the palace with news about a magical quilt maker who lived in the mountains. The king stamped his foot. And how is it that this person has never given me one of her quilts as a gift? He demanded. She only makes them for the poor, your majesty, the soldier replied. And she will not sell them for any amount of money. Well, we shall see about that, the king roared. Bring me a horse and 1,000 soldiers. And they set off in search of the quilt maker. But when they arrived at her house, the quilt maker merely laughed. Oh, my quilts are for the poor and the needy, and I can easily see that you are neither. I want one of those quilts, the king demanded. It might be the one thing that will finally make me happy. The woman thought for a moment. Make presents of everything you own, she said, and then I'll make a quilt for you. With each gift that you give, I'll sew in another piece. When at last all your things are gone, your quilt will be finished. Give away all my wonderful treasures, cried the king. I don't give things away, I take them. And with that, he ordered his soldiers to seize the beautiful star quilt from the quilt maker. But when they rushed upon her, she tossed the quilt out the window, and a great gust of wind carried it up, 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 and away. The king was now very angry. He marched the woman down through the town and up another mountain, where he had his royal ironmaker shape a thick bracelet of iron. Then they chained her to a rock in the cave of a sleeping bear. Once more, the king asked her for a quilt, and once more she refused. Very well, then, the king replied. I'll leave you here, and when the bear awakens, I'm sure he will make a very fine breakfast of you. Well, later, when the bear's eyes opened and he saw the woman in his cave, he stood on his mighty hind legs and gave a roar that rattled her bones. She looked up at him and sadly shook her head. It's no wonder you are angry and so grouchy, the quilt maker said. You've nothing but rocks on which to rest your head at night. Bring me an armful of pine needles, and with my shawl, I'll make you a great big pillow. And that is what she did. No one had ever been so kind to her before. So the bear broke the iron bracelet and asked her to spend the night. Now, although the king was very good at being greedy, he was very bad at being mean. All that night he could not sleep for thinking about the poor woman in the cave. Oh my, what have I done? He wailed. So he woke up his soldiers, and they all marched in their pajamas to the cave to save her. But when they arrived, the king found the quilt maker and the bear having a breakfast of berries and honey. Now the king was completely forgot about feeling sorry and became angry all over again. He ordered the royal island makers to build an island barely enough for the woman to stand on her tiptoes. Once again, the king asked for a quilt, and once again, she said no. Very well, the king replied. Tonight, when you're too tired to stand and lie down to sleep, you'll drown. And the king left her alone on that tiny island. Shortly after he left, the quilt maker saw a sparrow flying across the Great Lake. A cold, fierce wind was blowing, and it did not look like the poor bird would make it to shore. The quilt maker called to him, and he stopped to rest on her shoulder. The poor, tired sparrow was shivering, so the woman quickly made him a coat from the scraps of her purple vest. And when he was warmed and the wind had stopped, the bird flew off. But he was very grateful to the quilt maker for what she had done. And soon the sky darkened as the air filled with huge clouds of sparrows, thousands of wings beating together, and they swooped down, lifted the woman in her little beaks, and carried her safely to shore. Well, again that night, the king could not sleep for thinking about the woman alone on the island. Oh my, what have I done? He moaned. So he woke up his sleepy soldiers again, and they marched in their pajamas down to the lake to set the women free. But then they arrived. She was sitting on a tree limb, sewing tiny purple coats for all the sparrows. I give up, the king shouted. What must I do for you to give me a quilt? As I said, the woman answered, give away all the things you own, and I'll sew a quilt for you. And with each gift that you give, I'll add another piece to your quilt. I can't do that, cried the king. I love all my wonderful, beautiful things. But if they don't make you happy, the woman replied, what good are they? That's true. And he thought about what she had said for a long, long time. So long that weeks went by. Oh, all right, he finally muttered. If I must give away my treasures, then I must. The king went to his castle and searched from top to bottom for something that he could bear to give away. Frowning, he finally came out with a single marble. But the boy who received it smiled so brightly in return, the king went back for more things. Eventually, he brought out a pile of velvet coats and then went about the town, giving them to people dressed only in rags. All were so pleased that they marched up and down the street in a grand parade. Still, the king did not smile. Next, the king fetched 100 waltzing blue Siamese cats and a dozen fish that were clear as glass. Then the king ordered his merry-go-round with the real horses to be brought out. Children cried with delight and cartwheeled around him, and just the smallest of smiles began to show on the king's face. Well, the king looked about him and saw the dancing and the merrymaking and all the happiness his gifts had brought. A child took hold of his hand and pulled him into the dance. Now the king really smiled, and he even laughed out loud. "How can this be?" he cried. "How can I feel so happy about giving my things away? Bring everything out. Bring it all out at once." And so meanwhile, the quilt maker kept her word and started making a special quilt for the king. With each gift that he gave, she added another piece to his quilt. So the king kept on giving and giving and giving, and when at last there was no one left in town who had not received something, the king decided to go out into the world and find others who might be in need of his gifts. But before he left, the king promised the quilt maker he would send a sparrow back to her each and every time he gave something away. Morning, noon, and night, the wagons rolled out of town, each piled high with the king's wonderful things. And for years and years, messenger sparrows flew to the quilt maker's windowsill as the king slowly emptied his wagons, trading his treasures for smiles around the world. On and on the quilt maker worked, and piece by piece the king's quilt grew more and more beautiful. Finally, one day a weary sparrow flew into her window and perched on her needle. She knew then and there that it was the last messenger, so she put a final stitch in the quilt and started down the mountain in search of the king. After a long search, she finally found him. The king's royal clothes were now in tatters, and his toes poked out of his boots. Yet his eyes glittered with joy, and his laugh was wonderful and thunderous. The quilt maker unfolded the king's quilt from her bag. It was so beautiful that hummingbirds and butterflies fluttered about. Standing on tiptoe, she tenderly wrapped it around him. "What's this?" cried the king. "As I promised you long ago," the woman said, "when the day came that you yourself were poor, only then would I give you a quilt." The king's great sunny laugh made green apples fall and flowers turn his way. "But I'm not poor," he said. "I may look poor, but in truth, my heart is full to bursting, filled with memories of all the happiness I've given and received. I'm the richest man I know." "Well, nevertheless," the quilt maker said, "I made this quilt just for you." "Thank you," replied the king. "I'll take it, but only if you accept a gift from me. There is one last treasure I have left to give away. All these years I've saved it just for you." And from his rickety, rundown wagon, the king brought out his throne. "It's really quite comfortable," the king said, "and just the thing for long days of sewing." And from that day on, the king often came to the quilt maker's house in the clouds. By day, the quilt maker sewed the beautiful quilts she would not sell. And at night, the king took them down to the town. There, he searched out the poor and the downhearted, never happier than when he was giving something away. The quilt maker's gift. I think it has the spirit of the season, right?
I think so too. It's a great story.
It's a wonderful story.
I was so lost in it, I didn't realize that was the end.
Well, well, I should have maybe said the end, but the story doesn't end there, and we'll see the second book, or we'll listen to the second book next week, as I continue the quilt maker's gift, into the quilt maker's journey. So she does some wonderful things even after this.
Sounds like a great thing to look forward to next week.
Yes. So I think we're ready to take a little break and come back to see your snowy titles. What do you think about that?
I think it sounds great. Yay! What a lovely musical interlude.
Yes,
Thank
it
you,
is.
Jerry.
And that's Ben's giving his gift of music that he so naturally has.
Absolutely. It would have taken me ages to come up with something half that good.
Oh, I think I probably never would have come up with something that good. So,
Well, half that good,
well,
maybe.
but your talent. I see a piano in your background, so I know that you're
Not
musically.
if I go like this.
No, you disappeared it.
Anyway, thanks so much for sharing those great stories. And if for those of you just joining us, we are chatting about books that have winter or snowy themes perfect for this time of year. And for me, at least, I think there's something so perfect about reading a book that's set in the snow or in the winter when it's cold outside, when it is actually chilly and cold outside. And so most of the books I'm talking about today aren't tied to a specific holiday, so you could read them in January or February. You can read them any time of the year. This is just the time of year I'm going to recommend them. And if you're looking for a holiday-specific book, Donna Van Leer and Richard Paul Evans are Christian fiction authors who write Christmas book series, and Anne Perry writes a Christmas mystery series as well as her regular mystery series. And there are so many other authors who do great novels, Christmas themed as well. Too many for me to list here. And there are many authors for all the holidays down in our youth services department too. And they separate them out by holidays. It makes it nice and easy.
And we have many because since we have been going curbside and people have to like put them on hold and not necessarily browse them, they are fuller than typical at this time of year. Usually it's all empty shelves, but we do have plenty of Christmas books left. And if you want a Christmas book grab and go bag, we'll put one together for you.
And I bet you could get one for Hanukkah or for Kwanzaa too.
And Hanukkah, yes, and Kwanzaa, we have all those holidays.
Excellent. So perfect reading for all ages. So today I'm going to start chatting about nonfiction, and then I've tried to separate things out by genre. I try to always have some kind of structure. Now that we're not still reading the world, I can't just hop from country to country, so I have to get a little more creative. So I'm going to start with a book called Snow, a scientific and cultural exploration by Giles Whittell. And this is everything you might have wanted to know, or more than you wanted to know, about snow. It talks about how snowflakes are made, why avalanches happen and how we measure them, different sports you can play in the snow, predicting snowstorms, and even the role of snow in art and how different animals have adapted to snowy climates. And his absolute love and enthusiasm for snow shines throughout the book, which keeps the reader super engaged. And he also discusses the importance of snow for agriculture, industry, the water it provides, and the impact that climate change could have on all of those uses. And the other nonfiction book that I wanted to talk about is called In the Kingdom of Ice, The Grand and Terrible Polar Voyage of the USS Jeannette by Hampton Sides. And so that book is about a ship that sailed in the late 1800s, and it disappeared in 1879 in the Arctic. And all the newspapers at the time were thinking that that meant that the ship was just sailing freely. They just didn't have telegraph where they were. And let me put my dog down. She's snoring very loudly. Hold on just a second. There you go. There you go. And so I was thinking if I was holding her, maybe she would be less disruptive, but she's getting fidgety. So in 1879, the ship disappeared in the Arctic, and all the newspaper outlets were saying, oh, maybe they're, just sailing around freely. But I think any of us who've read shipping histories or know much about Arctic voyages from that time period can probably surmise that the crew didn't fare as well. They were repeatedly trapped in and released from the ice until the ship ended up sinking. The crew survived the sinking of the ship and they tried to make it to safety. Many of them did not, a few of them did. And so the book talks about the captain's biography, the cargo the ship was carrying, the different relationships and dynamics among crew members, the history of the polar expeditions, and it has an icy but grim tour of the ship itself when they rediscovered the part of it that had survived the storm. Either, I'm not entirely clear if it was still above water, trapped in the ice, or if it had sunk, but I do own the book, so I'll have to read it and find out. It's just a perfect icy read.
So I have and as you were telling and sharing your nonfiction books, I remember us talking about Snowflake Bentley.
Oh,
Which is a
yeah.
nonfiction book that is in the youth section, but is a very informative and interesting book. And again, beautiful illustrations, and it won the Caldecott Award. And Mary Azarian is the illustrator, and Jacqueline Briggs Martin is the author. And yeah, it's a wonderful book too.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Jerry. Yay. So I'm going to swerve away from the nonfiction into the realm of fiction. And the first book I'd like to talk about is called The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. And it focuses on two main characters named Jack and Mabel, who build a home in Alaska in the 1920s. And Alaska, there are a lot of places that are still very remote today. And in the 1920s, it was even more that case. And their communication wasn't as easy because they didn't have cell phones and the internet. And so they're very isolated and it's very, very cold outside. And the two of them desperately want to have children. And they start seeing this young girl appear in the woods around their cabin. And she kind of keeps her distance, but as time passes, she ends up becoming more and more a part of their lives. But when they ask their neighbors about her and where her family might be, no one else has seen her. And so it's both a story of a family that they create and the mystery of whether or not the girl is real, told alongside what it was like to live in that cold, isolated wilderness back in the 1920s. And the cover is striking. It's this little girl all bundled up, peeking out from behind a big, I think, birch tree in the snow. And you see her there, and then you see there's a little fox peeking out from behind another tree. And the cover is what drew me to that book. And every time I see it, I just want to like grab a blanket and cuddle up. And the other like regular fiction, before we start exploring different genres, book that I want to talk about is Beartown by Frederick Bachman, which is the first in a 2-book series. The second one, I believe, is Us Against You. And Frederick Bachman is a Swedish author. It's a country that's familiar with snow and cold. And so the book is all about a small Swedish community that essentially lives and breathes for hockey. And they believe that a winning hockey team will revitalize the community because they think about when the town had its glory days and how the hockey team was such a huge part of that. But this star hockey player is accused of sexually assaulting the team manager's daughter. The team manager is a former star player himself. And so, just like with any of Bachman's books, he also wrote A Man Called Ove, and Britt Marie was here, and My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry, all of which are books that are fantastic book club books and really good reads. And the same is true for Beartown. But all of his works are full of flawed characters that we can't help relating to. There are things in all of us that we see in his characters. And he really delicately balances comedy and despair. So you get a little bit of that kind of wry humor, and you also get, the harsh reality is mixed in. And some reviewers have even compared it to Friday Night Lights. It's not just about hockey, just like Friday Night Lights isn't just about football, but really good book. So then I'm going to turn the corner into horror. I didn't want to end on horror and suspense, so we're going to do horror and suspense now. So for horror, the first book is called Ararat by Christopher Golden, which is the first in his Ben Walker series. And in this book, explorers find what they think is Noah's Ark on top of a mountain in Turkey. And a crew begins to climb this mountain with the goal of writing a book and shooting a documentary of their experience as they do that. And members of the crew start to disappear. Other members of the crew start acting strangely. All of a sudden, they are trapped by a blizzard. It's full of good and evil, natural and supernatural, cold and snow and ice, as any good mountain climbing book would be, and a lot of suspense and dread and not knowing what comes next. So if you need kind of a pulse pounding mountain summiting, if you need a mountaintop experience, this would be a good book for you. And then the other horror novel I want to talk about is an absolute classic called The Shining by Stephen King, probably made famous more by the Jack Nicholson film, but still. And Stephen King is perhaps the best, he may be the most classic and well-known horror author, and this is one of the most classic and well-known horror novels. And a couple of his others, Dreamcatcher and Misery, also feature winter and snow prominently. But in The Shining, it's set in the Overlook Hotel in Colorado, which is snowbound, so no one can get out or in, and closed for the winter season. And the family of Jack Torrance, who's played by Jack Nicholson in the film, moves to the hotel because he is the newly hired caretaker. And his son can see these different scenes from the hotel's gruesome past. And eventually the rest of the family can too. And the story gets darker and darker. And that's why it's horror. It's a little scary for me, I think, but definitely something that a lot of people who enjoy scary novels might like. So for suspense, we're kind of walking the line between horror and mystery with our suspense novels here. So the first one is The Snowman by Yu Nesbu, which is number 7 in the Harry Hole series. I tried not to pick books that are in the middle of series, but this one was too perfect not to pick. So it's set in the author's home country of Norway and full of all these cold and wintry scenes. And so it's about a serial killer called the Snowman because he left kind of gruesome snow people behind in relationship to the murders that he commits. And so the detective, who's the main character, gets all of these teasing letters referencing connections between the snowman and an earlier case that he had solved. Although you can read this as a standalone, you don't have to read it in conjunction with the rest of the Harry Hole series. And I would even venture to say it's chilling in multiple senses of the word. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be here all day. And I also want to talk about a book called No Exit by Taylor Adams. This one is another one that the cover drew me in because it's just this icy road at night with these frozen trees. Ooh, sends chills down your spine. So No Exit by Taylor Adams. Main character's name is Darby, and she is trying to reach her mother, who is in late-stage pancreatic cancer, but her old car can't make it through the Colorado blizzard, and she has to stop at a visitor center. So she spends the night with this quirky group of stranded travelers, but she heads outside to try to place a phone call on her cell phone and looks into one of the other vans that's out there, and she sees a child who has been bound and kidnapped in a cage in this van. And so she then has to figure out who she can trust, how to get help, and which of her fellow travelers is the one who did the kidnapping, all with the end goal of saving the kiddo. So definitely a pulse-pounding suspense with some serious themes, as are true with our other suspense and horror novels too. So then to the slightly lighter, I have mysteries, and I've chosen a couple that are a bit more on the cozy side. My first is a new collection coming out called Midwinter Murder, Fireside Tales from the Queen of Mystery by Agatha Christie, the one and only Queen of Mystery. And so this is a collection of 12 stories with a variety of different characters. So you'll see some Hercule Poirot, I never can say it, Poirot, and Miss Marple. And the most notable is Three Blind Mice, which is a locked room mystery in which guests become snowbound in a remote location. If you're looking for something that's more novel length and not short stories, Murder on the Orient Express, which is not in this collection, is a super good choice. I also feel I would be remiss not to mention Ruth Ware's newest book, One by One, which takes place in a snowy ski chalet. And I think I've talked about it here before, so I didn't want to spotlight it, but I read it and thought it was quite good. Skiing plays a major role in that one. And if you're not familiar with a locked room mystery, Agatha Christie was well known for them, and it's one of those where no one can get in, no one can get out, and yet people are disappearing or getting murdered.
Very
So
mysterious.
it's so mysterious, you're right. The other mystery I want to talk about is called Dim Sum of All Fears by Vivian Chen, which is the second in the Noodle Shop mystery series. Main character's name is Lana, and she is getting her life together, figuring out what she wants to do for a career and where she wants to live. But her mother asks her to manage the family noodle restaurant for a couple weeks while she goes and helps out the grandmother. And while she's working there, the couple who runs the souvenir shop next door is found dead in the store. And so Lana feels an obligation to investigate, and the plot continues to thicken as Lana juggles the mystery, the restaurant, her personal life and romantic relationship, and a chilly Cleveland, Ohio winter, all at the same time. So romance is one of my favorite genres to read in the winter season because it warms your heart. And so the first book I'd like to chat about is called One Day in December by Josie Silver. And it's about a woman named Lori who falls in love at first sight one wintry day in London. She's on a bus. She sees a man at a bus stop, falls in love, and she searches and searches and searches for the man. But without anyone knowing any differently, her roommate ends up meeting him and falling for him. And the man in question has completely different feelings for both women. So it's a really well-paced story with really fleshed out characters and lots of themes of dealing with the patriarchy, both as a woman and as a man. And this next one, I spent an hour trying to think of. I could see the cover in my head and I couldn't find the title. And finally I found it. It is The Tourist Attraction by Sarah Morgenthaler, which is the first in the Moose Springs, Alaska series. And so our hero in this novel is Graham, who runs a locally famous diner in this Alaskan resort town, filled with all of these dishes with pun-based names, which of course I love, but he hates, which makes him super grumpy. But for some reason, all of the tourists who come to this resort town find that all the more charming and all the more endearing, so they keep coming back and keeping him in business. And our heroine is Zoe, who saved for years and years and years to be able to afford a ski vacation. And as soon as he sees her, he falls for her. And so it has great descriptions of the snowy scenery, a really nice pace to the romantic storyline, little bits of humor, and as any good resort town and lighthearted romance or mystery novel, good cast of quirky characters. So to finish, I'm going to do science fiction fantasy. These are both more on the fantasy side of the spectrum. And the first one is called The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, which is the first in a trilogy called the Winter Night Trilogy. And it is set in the northern woods of Russia, and centered on Vasya, who is a young girl who can work with magic and spirits. She ends up befriending these different supernatural entities. And this is in opposition to Constantine, who is an exiled priest, kind of forced to act as a servant in her family's home. He thinks they're demons, and so it's kind of the struggle between Vasya and Constantine. And it's heavily influenced by Russian history, culture, and folklore, and reads kind of like an old-fashioned or classic fairy tale. Really, really nice world building. And even though it reads like a classic tale, it has a fresh new kind of plot line to it and is a really fascinating twist. And there are 3 books in that series, so you can really kind of fall in and enjoy them. And then the last book that I wanted to talk about today is called Winter Tide by Ruth Anna Emrys, which is the first in the Innsmouth Legacy series. And she took inspiration from a work by H.P. Lovecraft, who is problematic for a lot of the racism and anti-Semitism that he espoused in his writing. But she has taken this and twisted it around so that those things are no longer an issue. It's also a great read even if you don't know that connection. And so in this world, there are 3 distinct human species, and the people who lived in Innsmouth were forced into internment camps to be joined 20 years later during World War II by the Japanese Americans that were interned. And the story itself is set during the Cold War, and the government recruits the 2 children who survived these internment camps to help them with Cold War related espionage type issues. And really, it's a book about identity, history, and the different connections between people. And the best part of the book for many is the crew that travels with these main characters. They're people of all different ages, races, backgrounds, and sexualities, but they're deeply connected to each other and their skills complement each other quite strongly. So it's a really, really interesting read. And I believe there are 2 or 3 books out in that series so far. I want to say 2. So all of these perfect chilly reads for a chilly day, and I know there are so many more. There are so many more I wanted to include. I had pages and pages, but for some reason, I just can't fill all of KHOI's airtime talking about books.
You don't have, all day. You
I
have a
know.
finite amount of time. And you always, though, although today you didn't do a quote from,
I did not. This may be the
yeah,
first time I haven't done a quote, but I did describe a cover or 2.
yes, you did. And, but you never disappoint us in that way because
Aw.
and that's how you remembered the one title.
It is. It actually, the one that I couldn't remember and was thinking about, I could see the cover in my head. And I had Googled, I had searched our catalog, I'd done subject searches because I was like, I know it came out this year. I know it's a contemporary romance. I know the front cover has a ski run on it and is kind of cartoony. And I know the title is 2 words and the author's last name starts with some letter between like G and O. And I knew all of these things. And I called the person who buys our fiction books and I said, hey, can you help me out? I think I had to buy, a second copy of this because it was super popular. And he did some looking. And I talked to one of my other coworkers and he did some looking. And we found it, but it was a team effort for sure. And sometimes when that cover sticks in your head, like you can pull that back out later. And it's just the right
Covers
book
are
for what you
important.
need. They are, but you can't always judge a book by its cover. There are a lot of good books with not so great covers too.
This is true. And so then the publishers usually change the covers.
Yes, they do
The
change
time.
over time too. And I want to point out to all of you as well that you can always stay connected to Ames Public Library even during the wintry season. If it's too cold and chilly to go out and get a book, you are welcome to use our online resources. We have several different ways that you can access digital books, audiobooks, magazines, video, and graphic novels, and all kinds of other fantastic things on Canopy, Hoopla, and Bridges. You can also connect with us at amespubliclibrary.org or amespl.org, as well as on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. And right now, the library is offering curbside pickup. And so all you have to do is walk, bike, or drive up to the library, send us a text on the number in the window, and we will deliver your materials to your car. You can pick up your holds. You can ask for a grab and go bag, which is a bag put together by our staff on a certain theme or for a certain age group. You can ask for our at-home activity kits. This week, it's these cute little robots. And you can also ask us for quick pick movies or books. And if you don't remember what we have in our quick picks collection, which are books that are super popular that you can check out without waiting in line, but they only check out for a week and you can't renew, we have little carousels that show all of our books and all of our movies on the homepage of our catalog. And so when you get to amespl.org, click on search the catalog and you'll see those quick pick carousels right there. I also want to take an opportunity to talk up some of the other great work that we're doing. We have our personalized picks service, which is where you fill out a form on our website. Regardless of age, we have them for youth, for teens, and for adults. And it sends it to our library staff who spend some time creating a list of recommendations just for you, not the same as any other list, just for you. And then you can decide if you want to check any of those out or ask us to give you some other recommendations too. And Jerry, I believe that Youth Services has some other stuff in addition. Is that right?
Right. So if you want to listen to a story but don't want to have the book in front of you, you can call 515-239-5636 for our storyline, where there are different options of reading a longer storybook like The Quilt Maker's Gift or a shorter story, some jokes. And then also this week we have a Spanish story. So
Ooh,
call in and at 515-239-5636.
excellent. And it's always fun. I have even called it, and I'm not necessarily a youth, but I enjoy listening all the same.
You never are too old to listen to a children's story. As
It's
many of
true.
our listeners probably know that, because
True.
I bet there's lots of adult listeners out there,
Including me.
including you and
And
Pippa.
of course, yes. And KHOI also offers great children's programming on Monday and Fridays at noon, as well as rebroadcasting this show on Saturdays. And so if you ever miss an episode, you can also always listen on our online archive. So that's a great option, especially this week since Jerry's doing a two-part story. If you don't remember the first part and want a refresher, you can always listen on the online archive and then listen to the new one next time.
This is true.
So Jerry, do you have a closing thought for us?
I do, and it's still going along with the being generous and giving back. And so there's a kind of vegetable in Vietnam called hay. It belongs to the onion family and looks like a scallion, and it is very good in soup. This makes me hungry for soup.
I know.
The more this plant, though, the more you cut the plants at the base, the more they grow. So if you don't cut them, they won't grow very much. But if you cut them often, right at the base of the stalk, they grow bigger and bigger. And this is also true of the practice of generosity. If you give and continue to give, you become richer and richer all the time, richer in terms of happiness and in well-being. This may seem strange, but it is always true.
Oh, I love that. And it goes so well with the stories you read this morning. Thank you. Or this afternoon.
Yeah.
And thanks to all of you out there for listening and spending an hour of your day with us. I am Kathy,
And I'm Jerry.
and this has been Reading Radio.
Hello, my name is Sarah Bolke. I work at the Ames Public Library. My husband, Rob, and I are sustaining members of KHY because it is about community, and more than ever, KHOI does this by providing valuable programming, important information, and a whole lot of fun. Rob and I especially
Okay,
love
good
Saturday
job.
morning
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
The
You
same
guys
to
have
you.
a great holiday.
Yes.
Yeah,
have a
you
great
too.
Thank you.
All
And
right.
we'll
Well,
enjoy your week.